You can be a boss, but not necessarily be a leader. Remember that. Leaders are only leaders when people want to follow them. Now, when you're a boss and you have control over the people, that doesn't mean that you're a leader. It means you're a boss, you're a supervisor. But leaders, people that will follow you into battle, that believe in you, that trust in you, that will put their life in your hands, that's leadership. And that's a skill that you develop not by appointment, but by just who you are, your character. You know, I say this all the time. Business is business. Whether it be on the street or whether it be legitimate, business is business. And you have to have a certain way of handling yourself. There's certain principles that work whether you're on the street or in the boardroom. You know, things that I learned on the street, you're not going to learn in school. You're not going to learn in a boardroom. You're not going to learn how to handle certain situations like I did on the street. And I want to give you the benefit of that experience. I'm sure most all of you watching this now have heard of John Gotti. John has had more publicity than anyone else in the mob since the days of Al Capone. Well, there was a time when I had a sit down with John Gotti, and in a sit down in mob life, that's where you settle disputes. Just about everything that goes on in that life is settled through a sit down. And I had an incident with John Gotti over a swap meet or a flea market, to use another term for it. And basically, we had a disagreement. Now, the way this came about, my involvement in the market, I really had nothing to do with it to begin with. But in the mob life, people come to you all the time with various business deals. I think there's a misunderstanding that mob guys sit in their social clubs and they devise all these schemes to overtake businesses, infiltrate businesses, do all of this. It's not that way. Oftentimes, somebody who is in a business runs into some trouble or has an idea how to defraud that business, and they come to us. Now, why do they come to us? They figure we'll protect them, we'll never tell on them, and we'll finance them if they need it. So in this particular case, it was a gentleman, a legitimate guy that owned this swap meet flea market. He came to me because his partner was selling drugs in the market, giving it a bad name. He was afraid that the market would be destroyed as a result of it. So he came to me for help. I investigated it a little bit. I made a deal with him, and then I got rid of the guy that was selling drugs. I chased him out of the market. When I chased him out, that was enough. He wouldn't come back. Unbeknownst to me, he ran to John Gotti. And that's how John got involved in this, because John saw, hey, this is a flea market. It's very lucrative. Maybe I can get involved. I can make some money too. And this happened quite often in the mob life. That's how business things or business transactions sometimes occurred. That's how these sit downs occurred. You had a dispute, whether it be with a made guy, a mob guy in your own family, or in this case, in another family. John was obviously a Gambino guy. I was a Colombo guy, and it all came together like that. So we had to sit down and we had to resolve this dispute. And either we were going to work together in the market or one of us was going to get out. Now, I understood I can never work with John in a business situation. John was a narcissistic type of guy. He was pretty egotistical. He could never lose an argument. He always had to be on top and in control. And for me, it was just all about getting what I wanted. That was it. So I understood John's personality. I understood his character. He had an ego, and he was a narcissist in many ways. Now, I'm not knocking him. You know, socially, I had a great time with John. We would go to a lounge, a bar, we would have drinks, we'd have fun, great. But in business, he was pretty much a nightmare. You didn't want to be involved with him. So getting into this whole market, I had to devise a way to make John think that he was winning the argument, but I would get what I wanted anyhow.
You know, I don't know if you know this, but every time you connect to your Wi-Fi, whether it be maybe at Starbucks, maybe in an airport, even in your own home, there's hackers out there, and they can steal all your passwords. They can get your photos. They even get your personal data. And they do it faster than a pickpocket in a crowded subway. Trust me on that. These guys are experts. They know what they're doing. So that's where private internet access comes into play. PIA, it's a VPN, and that's a virtual private network. And what that does, it encrypts all your connections through a tunnel, and you can't penetrate it. You know, this way it shields your digital life from the eyes of your internet provider. Very, very important. Going online, you know, without protection, It's like announcing your personal business on a megaphone in Times Square where everybody can hear it. Everybody is listening. And you know, you're going to get burned. There's no question about it. Whenever you browse online, whenever you're using an unprotected device, it sends out information, and that information is government censored. They're listening. It's like putting your internet into witness protection. How's that for old school stuff that I would say? But here's the deal. Here's the beauty of it. PIA, it opens up the entire world to you. You want to watch The Shawshank Redemption? Now let's say it's not available in your area. It's on Netflix. Well, with PIA VPN, you can watch the show, which might be available in Australia, by changing it to the Australia server, just like that. And different regions, they have different content. With PIAs, they have 91 countries you can access, and shows that normally are blocked in your area, you know, you can find it someplace else. And I've been using this private internet access myself. And with over 30 million downloads and approving dash logs policy tested in court, these guys are legit. They're good. One subscription, it protects unlimited devices, every one that you have. One subscription. So right now you can get 83% off internet access by using my link, and that link is piavpn.com/Michael Franzese. Don't forget it. Or you can click on the link right here in the description below. It's just $2.03 a month. You get 4 extra months free if you sign up. And you got a 30-day money-back guarantee. You know, people, in this game, the house always wins. Unless you know how to play it smart. So right now, go get private internet access. Get it today. It's an offer you shouldn't refuse.
So the way I thought, I said, the best way to resolve this, let John buy me out of the market. But if I would go to John and say, John, I'm buying you out, immediately he would turn around and say, you don't buy me out, I buy you out, which is exactly what I wanted anyway. And that's exactly what happened. So I put a number on the table. He agreed to it. He bought me out. He kept the market. He could tell everybody all over town that he bested me. He won. I got the money that I wanted. In the end, I satisfied the guy that came to me. I gave him a nice paycheck. I kept some money. And John kept the market. And 3 months later, the market collapsed because I knew exactly what was going to go on. That's what happens in these mob situations. So there again, I checked my ego at the door. Now, I could have went in and said, oh, I have an opportunity to beat John Gotti because I have a winning argument here. You cannot get involved with somebody that's involved with drugs. And I knew if this went up to the boss, because remember, at that time, I was a capo regime, and John was a capo. If we had to resolve this dispute with the boss because we couldn't come to terms, I knew that eventually I would win this argument. But I checked my ego at the door. I was confident in my ability to get what I wanted. I had ambition to satisfy my situation, satisfy the guy that came to me. And again, don't mistake that for ego. John had the ego, I had the confidence and the ambition, and in the end, I won out. So that's a good lesson. There really are 2 types of guys that are in that life, and they're separated by terminology. One is a racketeer, the other is a gangster. I'll explain both. The gangster, he's kind of the guy that does the heavy work, the work as we call it, the violent stuff. And many gangsters kind of like what they're doing. You know, they're a different breed in many, many ways. And they're necessary in some ways because that life at times is a violent life and things like that take place. On the other hand, you have the racketeer. Now, the racketeer is normally a bit more polished, has more of an ability to earn money. He brings the money into the family and people. Without money, I don't care what organization you have, whether it be legitimate or illegitimate, it doesn't survive, it doesn't last. I always say this, the mob in America, Cosa Nostra Mafia, became strong as a result of the government enacting prohibition. It was during prohibition that the mob started to earn real money. And when they earned real money, they became an organization. Before that, there were a bunch of street thugs extorting, shop owners, doing drugs and little things like that. When prohibition came in and they earned all of this money, that's when they started to become a power, an organization. They were able to buy politicians, buy off law enforcement. It became a whole different organization when the money started coming in. However, the racketeer has to be a combination of both. He has to have some gangster in him because he's going to be called upon to do a violent act or to be involved in violence in some way. The idea here is the more influence and more authority you have, the more you need to control your behavior. And I can tell you this, the gangsters, the guys that kind of enjoyed, relished, were very efficient at doing the violent work, they were victims of their own talents and their own abilities. Because guys like that never lasted. They never did, because eventually it caught up with them. Because they had, this desire, sometimes it was insatiable to do damage like that on the street. Normally they were dealt with the same way. They couldn't control themselves. They made people realize or think that they enjoyed these acts. So what happens with guys like that is you realize they're loose cannons. You don't want to leave them up to their own to handle things. So eventually they take themselves out. What I mean by that is the guys on top of them say, hey, I'm not going to deal with this guy. He's a loose cannon. I'll take care of him. And so many of those guys met their demise. So they were victims of their own insatiable talent or insatiable desire to commit violent acts. And as a result, they died in a violent way. If you're called to be a boss, the way you behave today needs to line up with the calling where God is moving you. I can give you an example from two very popular mob movies. One is Goodfella and the other is Casino. In both movies, the character I'm describing as a gangster is played by Joe Pesci. And in Goodfellas, what happened? Joe Pesci was the gangster who was ready to kill. He thought he was unaccountable. He was invincible until they walked him into a room, shot him in the back of the head, and that was the end of that because they don't want to deal with a guy like that. He had broken the rules. He had killed another made guy. You can't do that. You're going to end up the same way. It happens so often in that life, and that was a good description in that movie. Second movie, Casino. Remember that? He played the same type of character. And these were real characters in real life, guys that I was familiar with. There's one particular scene in Casino that stands out to me, and that's when Joe Pesci was sitting with the banker. And he had some money he invested with this banker, and he actually threatened him because he wasn't getting his money back. And he said, I'll hit you over the head. I'm going to put you in a coma. I'll go to jail. I don't care. When I come out, you'll be getting out of your coma, and I'm going to hit you in the head again. That was Joe Pesci. But what happened in the end? He met the same demise, if you remember, in the desert, but actually it happened in Indiana where he was in a cornfield, and he met with his demise. Another good idea of the gangster versus the racketeer, that same scene, Robert De Niro, who wasn't a made guy, but it illustrates what I'm talking about. He was more of a racketeer type of guy. He was telling Joe Pesci, you don't act like that. You don't threaten a banker. He's going to go to the FBI. You're going to get yourself in trouble. You're going to bring more heat. Well, that's what happened eventually. So you got to learn to control the authority that you have. Guys in the mob that wore their badge on their sleeve and wanted everybody to know who they were and pushed their weight around as a result, they all met with a bad circumstance at the end. They all met with a bad consequence in the end. They got killed. You got to learn to control the power that you have under you. If you're a leader, you got to learn to restrain yourself and don't act out in a situation or a way that can get you in trouble later on. Self-restraint is very important. Self-control, very important. John Gotti made a massive miscalculation in taking Paul Castellano out. I'm sure you all know the story. In front of Sparks Restaurant, Paul Castellano was assassinated. Gotti was charged with it. Sammy Gravano later gave testimony about it in a trial. He was there. He was one of the guys that planned it. This is according to his own admission. But what happened? John Gotti was not looked upon favorably, not by law enforcement and not by people in other families. The head of the Genovese family, somebody I knew well, Vincent the Chin Gigante, they called him. He was very upset that John Gotti would take out a boss without going to the commission and seeing if he had the okay to do this. He acted alone without getting the advice from anybody else. Later on, that hurt him. There was an assassination attempt on John Gotti's life. He lived through it, but what happened to him eventually? Went to prison, died in jail, died a horrible death, by the way. So he wasn't able to restrain himself. Now, the other side of that, Paul Castellano, the story was possibly going to take out John Gotti. We don't know that for a fact, but might have been true. But John should have exercised a different kind of control. He should have tried to reason himself out of that situation rather than taking the steps that he took. And later on, it came back to haunt him. He didn't have self-restraint. He didn't have self-control. Everybody in that life that acted the way John Gotti did, just about everybody, met with their demise. You have to, when you're in a leadership position, exercise restraint when you're supposed to. Very, very important. I always say this. If you become a made man, you actually take the oath in Cosa Nostra Mafia, and you die of old age and you die free, you've really accomplished something. Not too many people get to live their life that way. It's a very tough road to navigate, and you got to develop the skills. Not everybody rises to the top. I was fortunate. I became a capo regime, a captain, a very powerful position in that life. But you have to develop the skills to get to that point. And how did it happen for me? Well, my father was a good student of that life. He was the underboss of the Colombo family, very powerful position, second in command under the boss. My dad was a well-respected guy. He earned that respect. He was charismatic in his own way. He proposed me for membership in that life, and he wanted to teach me how best to navigate it. So he gave me some very, very important advice. At a young age, he said to me, Michael, he said, a couple of things I'm going to tell you that are going to help you navigate the mob life. Number one, be a good listener. He said, don't be the first to speak. Always listen before you talk. Get advice or get information from other people before you make a statement. When you make a statement, know what you're talking about. Because in the mob life, if you talk out of turn, if you insult somebody, it could be very, very serious. There are serious circumstances and serious consequences, I should say, to making that mistake. Next, he told me something that was ultra important. He said to me, Michael, in that life, be the last to condemn somebody, the last to judge somebody. Because when your turn comes, and it will, you're going to be looked or judged at the same way. He said, so be the last one to ever condemn or judge someone. That was very valuable experience for me because in that life, without saying, you're going to be put on the spot at some point in time. It happened to me. And people remember, well, you know, Michael didn't accuse anybody that quickly. He didn't judge somebody. He didn't condemn somebody. And they'll look at you the same way, and they looked at me the same way. Very important advice. Another thing he said, Mike, always be kind and nice to the little people. Now, when he said little people, he didn't mean to be offensive. It was just his way of saying something. He said the valet parker, the person that, checks your coat, the waitress, the waiter. Be kind to them because they're the ones that make you strong. They're the ones that are really going to mean something for you in your life. You know when I learned that? Standing in front of a jury. I was on trial 5 times, and I can tell you this, some of the most intense feelings you'll ever get in your life is when you're standing in front of a jury, 12 people. They're not really your peers. I'm a mob guy. They're not really my peers. They're the little people that my dad was talking about. And when you're standing in front of them, waiting for them to render a verdict on your life that can mean imprisonment for the rest of your life, you only want to hear one word, and that word is not. When you hear that, you relax. So the little people in life are the ones that eventually pass judgment on you. So always remember to be respectful. So all of these skills that my dad taught me, they really sunk in. And when I started to deal with my men and the guys around me, people saw qualities in me that said, hey, this guy can rise to the top. He can be a leader. And my boss eventually made me a leader in that life. As a capo regime, you are a street boss. You have men assigned to you. And I had a lot of men under my control. And it was a funny thing with me. I told my guys, I said, listen, if any of you want to become made members in this life, don't stay in this crew. I'm not going to bring you to that point. And they say, why, Mike? I said, very simple. When I make you a made guy, I lose you. All the time and effort I put into you is gone because you become your own man. So if you want to be a made man, more power to you, but don't stay in this crew. Now, if you want to make money, a lot of money, if you want to have respect, if you want to enjoy yourself and have a good time, this is the place to be because I'm going to treat you right and I'm going to make you make money. And when they heard that, nobody left. So, these are certain skills that you understand how to deal with people. I say this all the time. You can be a boss, but not necessarily be a leader. Remember that. Leaders are only leaders when people want to follow them. Now, when you're a boss and you have control over the people, that doesn't mean that you're a leader. It means you're a boss, you're a supervisor. But leaders, people that will follow you into battle, that believe in you, that trust in you, that will put their life in your hands, that's leadership. And that's a skill that you develop not by appointment, but by just who you are, your character. When my dad first proposed me to become a member of this life, he never really explained the life to me. Because remember, this is a secret life. You're not supposed to talk about it with anybody outside of the life. And if my dad was anything, he was a good soldier. He wouldn't violate that policy, even with me, his own son. He just knew I had it in me. He was confident in that. And he said to me, go home and do what you're told. I'm going to send a message downtown and they'll tell you what to do from that point. And, even though I knew what my dad was all about, it was never from his lips. It was always from observation, from the media, from others. He never talked about that life because, again, he was a good soldier. About 2 weeks later, after leaving my dad, after having this conversation with him, a captain in the family picked me up, took me to see the boss. And the boss sat me down and he said, Michael, I got a message from your father. He said, you want to become a member of this life. Is that true? I said, yes. He said, here's the deal. From now on, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're on call to serve this family, the Colombo family. And to point that out, he said, if your mom is in trouble, if your mom is sick and dying, and you're at her bedside, and we call you to service, you leave your mom, you come to serve us. From now on, we're number one in your life before anything and everything. When and if we feel you deserve this privilege, you deserved the honor, you've earned it to become a member of this life, we'll let you know. From now on, you answer and you report to us. And he was the boss. He's passed away now. His name was Tom DeBella. I can mention it. But he was the boss. So I had to learn how to respect the boss. I had to observe him, watch how he conducted himself. And I had to learn how to live under his authority, because that's what it was all about at that point in time. And so I observed him for the next 2 years. I was in kind of like a recruit or a pledge period where I had to do anything and everything I was told to do to prove myself worthy. It could have been something very menial, drive the boss to a meeting, sit in the car for 2 or 3 hours, waiting for him to come out of the meeting. God forbid you leave that car, you go to get a newspaper, maybe go to the restroom, he comes back, you're not there, you're in trouble. I know I did that once, I paid the price for it. A lot of stuff like that. So I had to learn and observe my boss and pick up on certain things that were necessary in that life to maintain control over the guys under you. And I was a good student at that. I watched, I learned, I listened, I paid attention, I played by the rules. In that life you need to if you want to survive. And so I developed the skills by observing my boss and paying attention to him. So remember, leadership can only come to those who are willing to accept leadership. That's the first step. Got to be willing to take it. Not everybody wants to be a leader, but if you're willing to accept leadership, well, then you can become a leader. I bring this back to a situation I had with my dad. My dad was convicted of masterminding a nationwide bank robbery ring. And I can tell you this, my dad was innocent. My dad was no bank robber. He was framed on that case. He did bad things in his life, no doubt, but this particular crime that he was sentenced to 50 years in prison on and did 40 years of that 50 in prison, my dad was innocent of. He was no bank robber. But he went into prison. He stood up. He never cooperated with the government. He had offers to do that. He could have bought himself out of a jail sentence. He refused to do it. He was a stand-up guy. He got home on parole, and my father was a captain, a capo regime, as was I. I was a captain also. I had been elevated to that position. And when he got home, the boss of our family at the time, I can mention his name, Carmine Persico, he has passed away. He died 2 years ago in prison. He was convicted on the Mafia Commission case by Rudy Giuliani, like so many others. He took the really disappointing step to breaking my dad. He took his captaincy away from him. And I was very upset about it. I said, Dad, you're the most stand-up guy in this life. How could he insult you like that? And I was very upset about it. Now, Persico said the reason he did that is because every time my dad came out, he would violate his parole. He would associate with other people. He had men underneath him, and it caused him to violate. And that was the excuse he used. But I knew that wasn't true. I knew that Persico was concerned because I was doing quite well. My father was still pretty much of a power in that life. I think he was trying to send a message to my dad and to me, again, that he was the boss, like he did when he brought me into that room. Well, to me, this was just a terrible insult, and I was very angry. And I said, Dad, we can't stand for this. I said, it's time to fight back. I said, they walked me into a room, now they're doing this to you. I said, this is just not right. And he said to me, son, listen to me. I know you're angry. He said, I understand it. We both know the mentality behind it. We know why it happened. But it's time to make a strategic or a tactical retreat. This is not the time. If we try to fight this at this point, it's not going to work out. He said, let's just lay back and watch them ruin themselves. They can't go on with things like this. It's going to come back to haunt them. And so what we did at the time, even though I was ready to fight, we had the ability to fight, we certainly had the spirit to fight, it wasn't the time to fight. It was time to make a tactical retreat and come back another day. Now, there are times when it's time to stand up. If this had gotten to the point where there was just no more backing down, then we would have fought. It wouldn't have been good. It would have had an outcome that wasn't pleasant for somebody, maybe more than one party. But if we had to stand up in that life and fight, we would have. This wasn't the time. We were ready to come back another day. There's no shame in that. There again, ego, pride. There's times when you take your ego out of it, you take your pride out of it, and you make the right decisions. A good leader, a good boss, always acts without pride or ego getting in the way. Again, my dad and I had confidence. We knew our ability. We knew we could have rallied men together. My father was popular, so was I. I had a big crew, but it wasn't the time. It wasn't the right time. So we had to put the fact that we were insulted away. We had to dismiss all of that and keep everything intact for that time and wait for a better time to come back. So sometimes remember this word, remember this phrase, tactical retreat. Times you have to do that. Come back another day when you're better prepared, when the situation is more doable, when timing is right. Timing is important in life. And this was a situation where it was better to make that retreat and come back again another day. There is a comparison here between what happened to myself and my dad at the time, because Persico ended up dying in prison. My dad was released from prison, at least had a few more years of his life to enjoy, and he died a natural death. And here I am, several years later, out of that life, being blessed and fortunate with a family that I love, children that I love, a ministry that I have. So the tactical retreat at that time really saved me, because had we gone against the boss at that time, maybe started a war in our family, it would have ended badly. No way would I have come out of that. Either I would have went to prison as a result of that, or I would have been killed. So the tactical retreat paid off for me and my dad at that point in time, and it didn't work out for the person we would have been against. And you might be in a situation in our own lives. I'm sure many of you have faced this. I get comments all the time, people coming to me, Michael, I'm so angry. This person did me wrong. And my boss is not treating me right, and this and that, and all different situations, many of situations that you may have experienced on your own. You're having an argument with a family member. Do you go at that argument strong so that maybe the result of that is you don't speak for the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years? I've seen so many families argue, break up, split apart for years, when maybe a kind word, a soft retreat, let people calm down, come back another day, discuss it, when people are calm. Sometimes that's the way to go. That can save you a lot of trouble and a lot of headaches in your life, And one thing that I've learned, when you have a grudge against somebody, when you're angry, to carry that burden on your shoulders because you had a confrontation, you fought back at that time rather than wait. Take a tactical retreat, wait for another day when the situation is right, temperaments are down, emotions aren't high. You come back and you discuss it in another way, another time. Things work out. Sometimes it's not the right thing to fight at that moment. And it's not embarrassing that you walk away at that time. You show restraint. You don't go at it. It seems to work out better. My experience in life always has been that it works out better when we have restraint and we don't fight. Even though we have the will to fight, we have the desire to fight, we have the strength to fight, and we're capable of fighting, just not the right time. In New York, there are 5 families. Each family has a boss. He's the boss of that family. But Lucky Luciano, back in the 40s, created the Mafia Commission. And it's kind of like a panel of the bosses from all the different families. And whenever they wanted to set policy, they would all get together. If there was something imminent that all the families had to know about, they would get together and talk about it. And they would come out with a policy or a ruling. However, no commission member couldn't tell a boss what to do in his own family. The boss was allegedly the boss of his family. That's it. So I liken it to the UN. You know, they get together, all these countries, but the UN can't tell any particular nation, they can't tell that president what to do in his country, his nation. He's the boss. But you're not really the boss. Now, let me tell you why. Let me give you an example. Paul Castellano, boss of the Gambino family, very powerful guy, right? What he didn't realize is that John Gotti at that time was plotting to become his boss, except he wouldn't be around to know about it because in that life, there's no elections. You don't tell a boss, you got to step aside and I'm going to become the boss. When you become the boss, you take out the boss before you, or he retires. It's his choice. There's no election. His term of office isn't over. He makes that choice himself, or, unfortunately, he's taken out by another who wants to take his place. Paul Castellano, even though he thought he was the boss, Gotti took him out, and Gotti became the boss. Let me take it a step further. The boss of a family, he's the boss, right? Let me tell you what happened with Rudy Giuliani when he indicted all the bosses in the Mafia Commission case. He put them all on trial, he convicted all of them, and he sent them all to prison for 100 years. Who is the real boss? Rudy Giuliani. And Giuliani has a boss. He could be fired by the president. It goes on and on and on. So you may think you're the boss, but you're not really the boss. There's always somebody above you. So some people make the mistake of thinking they don't have any authority over them once they reach a place of authority themselves. When you step into leadership, when you become the boss, you're going to realize all those times you were submitted to a boss were just preparation for this. It's the same thing. You either faithfully serve a higher power or you'll forfeit having any power at all. People, I created this course because I've been fortunate and blessed enough to have a transformation in my life. If that transformation didn't occur, I'd either be dead or in prison for the rest of my life. And I know at some point in time, that's what I deserved. It's what I earned for myself, having spent over 20 years on the street every day in violation of both God's laws and the laws of man. And I realized that God had a different plan and a purpose for me, and my life has been transformed. And I'm here to hopefully help people as a result of what God has done in my life. So I created this course because I want it to be a benefit to you. I don't care what you're going through in life. I don't care what position you're in. God laid all these things out for us. People in biblical times went through the same thing that we're going through. You know, remember, the Bible was written by men, but inspired by God. And I've been able to relate so many of my experiences to people that went through the same thing at a different time, in a different era, in a different way, but really the same kind of circumstance. It was amazing to me, amazing, how many examples there were in the Bible that applied to some of the experiences that I was going through on the street. Now, I'm not implying in any way that the mob existed in biblical times. Didn't. But there were so many similarities in the way people had to handle things, in the way that I had to handle things on the street, and it's going to apply to you also.